This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Botswana's ruling BDP wins general election. Protests against US sanctions marked with new holiday in Zimbabwe. And Russia's Putin praises Africa-Russia ties as meeting ends with few concrete outcomes. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the programme. In business, the city of Johannesburg under cyber attack. And in sports, football broadcasting rights take centre stage at football lawyers' gathering in Cairo. We begin in Botswana, where the ruling party has won the general election after securing 29 National Assembly seats, representing 51% of the vote. Well, according to the Electoral Commission, the winner is declared once a party attains 29 parliamentary seats. That's the minimum requirement to form a government. This now means the Botswana Democratic Party's candidate, Mokgweetsi Masisi, is the elected president. The 58-year-old is standing on his record on tackling corruption. His win comes after the country went to the polls on Wednesday to elect 57 National Assembly and 490 local government representatives. The main opposition, the Umbrella for Democratic Change, secured 13 seats, while the Botswana Patriotic Front won 3, with the Alliance for Progressives coming last with only 1. This is likely to change as vote counting is ongoing.
I, Terence Tira Nwani, in my capacity as the Chief Justice of Botswana and the returning officer for the presidential elections, have the honor to declare to the nation of Botswana and the world at large that Dr. Mokgweetsi Eric Tshebetso Masisi is the elected president of the Republic of Botswana.
Well, CGTN's Lindy Mtongana has been following the elections for us from Gaborone. She joins us now. Lindy, Botswana's ruling BDP has been declared the winner of the general election. What's the mood like where you are?
Well, Karen, of course, the BDP, already in power for 53 years, walked into this election confident, and today they are celebrating that victory. Of course, the voting, the official votes started coming in as of yesterday. So we started seeing celebrations at various constituencies as those constituencies were called, and the BDP officially won them. Celebrations went on into the night. This morning, we're seeing that the BDP is posting on Twitter their president dancing and celebrating with many other people, of course. On the streets of Gaborone, though, it is actually quiet. The country living up to its reputation of being able to hold elections in a peaceful and calm manner. We are at the moment coming to you from the Gaborone International Convention Center, where the observer missions, the SADC and the AU missions, are currently giving statements to the media. They too have commended Botswana for holding this election in a free and fair and credible manner, and have also congratulated the people of Botswana for showing a high level of political maturity.
And Lindy, we understand that the vote counting is ongoing. Could you explain why we have a winner already?
Well, Karen, this actually works on a first-past-the-post system here in Botswana. There are 57 seats in the National Assembly. Those are the positions that the parliamentary candidates were vying for. The winner of this election needs 29 seats, a majority number of seats, in order to win this election. So as soon as a party reaches that number, that 29, then a winner is declared, and that took place at about 7:30 this morning local time. But of course, other constituencies were still delivering those results. We understand there are about 3 or so more still to go. Currently, the BDP now has a very strong majority in the National Assembly. At our last count, we saw that they officially have 36 seats in the National Assembly.
And finally, Lindy, what happens next?
Well, Karen, of course, once that counting is officially done, the work of the Independent Electoral Commission does come to an end. There are 30 days for any opposition parties or anyone at all really to lodge a complaint or an appeal or submit a petition to the Independent Electoral Commission or as well as the High Court should they find that there were some irregularities that need to be addressed in this election. Following that, though, the country will prepare for an election, the inauguration. The inauguration itself will be announced by the government. Following that, there will be the first sitting of Parliament where a cabinet will be chosen and the vice president will be announced, and officially Botswana will have its next government.
Okay, thank you very much, Lindy. That was CGTN's Lindy Mtongana there, following the election for us in Botswana. Moving on to other news. President Vladimir Putin has hailed the first ever Russia-Africa summit a success, calling this a new chapter in relations between Russia and the African continent. At the conclusion of the two-day-long event in Sochi, a number of memoranda of understanding were signed. But, as our correspondent Julia Chapman reports, the event was light on concrete details.
Friendship and solidarity. That's how the Russian president characterized his country's ties with Africa. Wrapping up his first summit, hosting over 40 heads of state from the continent, Vladimir Putin says the atmosphere was businesslike and friendly. African leaders attending in strong numbers welcomed Russia's interest, calling it long overdue.
This summit signals that Africa has indeed come into its own as a continent. We are a fully fledged player in the international arena and a continent that is ripe for investment and trade. At a time when the global trade arena is characterized by tensions and protectionism, the world's largest free trade area will soon be established on the African continent.
Plagued by an economic slowdown at home and fighting sanctions slapped by the West, Russia is looking for new trade partners. This show of strength, experts say, was a reminder that Moscow isn't isolated.
President Putin frequently repeats his vision of a multipolar world in which Russia and other countries would play a larger role on the international stage. It's a view African leaders appear ready to sign up to, having been received at this summit as equal partners.
But beyond optics, this event has been light on deliverables. The biggest takeaway, a $5 billion trade assistance deal aimed at giving Russian companies greater access to African markets. Agriculture, infrastructure, and energy cooperation were discussed, but without any outcomes. Amid accusations that Russia could be exerting undue influence, the Kremlin insists it's a mutually beneficial relationship.
If we're talking about a partnership of equals, I think we have to stop referring to Africa's past and stop holding Africa's past against it. We have to acknowledge, I think there are many cultural factors that go into this. We have to acknowledge that there are many interesting practices that are happening now in Africa which Russia can learn from.
Despite a lack of concrete outcomes, President Putin has hailed the inaugural event as a success. He says he plans to hold one every 3 years, with the next event likely to take place in South Africa. But the true test of Russia's Africa outreach will be in how it capitalizes on this momentum. Julia Chapman, CGTN, Sochi.
Zimbabwe is gearing up for mass protests in demand for lifting of economic sanctions against the government. ZANU-PF Administration Secretary Dr. Obert Mpofu and the Secretary General of South Africa's African National Congress, Ace Magashule, are expected to lead protests in Harare. The day has been declared a public holiday. The US and EU have both maintain sanctions, citing a lack of progress in democratic and human rights reforms. The financial and travel restrictions currently apply to 85 individuals, including President Emmerson Mnangagwa. There are also 56 companies facing restrictions. The government is blaming the sanctions for the country's economic problems. Southern African countries have joined calls for the sanctions to be lifted, saying they're damaging to the region's economy. Well, we are now joined by CGTN's Farai Mwakatuya in Harare and Angelo Coppola in Johannesburg for more on Zimbabwe's new public holiday. Farai, what's happening right now at the state-sponsored festival to protest at US sanctions?
Well, Karen, I'm currently at the National Sports Stadium where I'm sure you can see behind me hundreds of people are still trying to get into the stadium. There are thousands more who are already in this National Sports Stadium. What happened this morning is that Zimbabweans from all walks of life gathered in the Central Business District and marched to the stadium where these commemorations and celebrations are taking place. So as we speak, there are speeches that are being made by senior government officials, by representatives of SADC countries who are here in solidarity with Zimbabwe for the removal of these sanctions. There will be a football match between the country's two biggest teams later on, as well as a music festival overnight. And so it has been a party and carnival atmosphere. The people who are here are in very high spirit, very determined, and really trying to make their voice heard, Karen.
Okay, we'll return to you in a moment. Angelo, there is a big Zimbabwean presence in South Africa. What do they plan for today's public holiday?
Well, about 50 kilometers from where we are right now in Pretoria, there's a grouping or coalition that's come together. They're meeting at an art museum and they're going to be marching to the American embassy and then onto the EU embassy, where they're going to be handing over a memorandum related to that call to have those sanctions lifted against those individuals, because there's been this wide impact on the rest of the Zimbabwean economy. Meanwhile, here in Yeovil, which has a large Zimbabwean community present, life seems to be carrying on as usual. Many of the people here are struggling to find work, are making ends meet, doing anything they possibly can that's legal, and then trying to send money back home. But the bottom line is that we've been speaking to well-off Zimbabweans who are living in Harare, and they find a way around the current economic straits that the country's in. You will know, of course, that there's a 300% inflation rate in that country, but for the diaspora who is sending money home to their families, it's a bit more difficult because that currency is fluctuating. So it seems like it's business as usual here in Yeovil, 50 kilometers away, and there's only a small presence in Pretoria at the moment. Karen?
Okay, thank you, Angelo. Farai, back to you. Could you briefly take us through the sanctions and how they are hurting Zimbabwe's economy?
Well, Karen, as you mentioned earlier, there are about 85 individuals and several Zimbabwean companies that are on that sanctions list. But how these sanctions are affecting Zimbabwe is that they discourage, they prevent particularly American companies from doing business, from transacting, from sending money to Zimbabwe. And so even companies that are not on the sanctions list, that are not linked in any way to government or the ruling party, even individuals who have funds that need to be sent from the United States can't get those funds sent here because of these restrictions in terms of financial flows to this country. What it's also done is, investors from the United States can't bring their money here because of those sanctions. But beyond just American companies and American entities, it's also had an impact on other international investors from other countries who take a cue and take their position from this hardline stance that the United States has taken, and so will not want to do business with Zimbabwe. As such, it is affecting ordinary Zimbabweans. It is affecting Zimbabwe's capacity to recover its economy. It's affecting social service delivery, amongst others. So, things like medicines, funds to bring in supplies that are required by ordinary people can't be brought in because some payments that are destined for Zimbabwe are held up when they get to the United States. We've seen in the past where Zimbabwe sold its diamonds in Europe and in other places, the money that was meant to come to Zimbabwe from those sales has been held up and frozen in the United States. We've seen banks that have tried to send money or have found ways to send money to Zimbabwe, beating those sanctions, being sanctioned and being fined for doing that. So it is a few individuals, it is 85 individuals, some 50 companies, but the impact on Zimbabwe in general is quite far-reaching because other countries, other people who may not be in the United States or the EU, who may want to do business here, won't do so because they see Zimbabwe is under those sanctions. Karen.
Okay, back to you, Angelo. South Africa's leadership has advocated the removal of sanctions in Zimbabwe. How have the sanctions affected South Africa?
Well, it's not only South Africa that's called for those sanctions to be removed. There's been a concerted effort since the UN General Assembly sat a little over a month ago, and most of the African countries in the SADC community have also all advocated for that sanctions regime to be lifted. In terms of impacts on South Africa, well, It's indirect in the sense that we have a very large expat Zimbabwean community in South Africa. Many of them are qualified but can't work because they can't get work permits because of the government's stance on immigration in terms of people who haven't completed their proper documentation. So we have a large community here. So the impacts are more social than they are economic. South Africa exports, as you know, a huge amount into Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has nothing really much to export into South Africa, so there's a trade imbalance there. But generally, South Africa has escaped any kind of fallout from those sanctions against Zimbabwe, and it's unlikely to change anytime soon because of the relative strength of the South African economy in comparison to what's happening in Zim. Of course, you know, our economic growth rates are minimal, around 0.5%, but a lot better than they are in Zimbabwe right now. So if those sanctions do get lifted, we're likely to see things turn around fairly quickly, but South Africa, to a large extent, has escaped any impacts of those sanctions, Karen.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Angelo. Back to you, Farai. What is the government expecting after today's protest holiday?
Well, I think, Karen, what Zimbabwe is expecting is to send a message. I think for many years it has been the government, it has been the ruling party that has spoken out against these sanctions, that has pointed to the fact that they are hurting ordinary Zimbabweans, that they are hurting the economy. But this time around, I think the message that they are trying to send is that, all Zimbabweans from all walks of life, as seen by the numbers that have gathered here, what the government will hope is that the EU and the US will see that it is not just government and the ruling party that is calling for the removal of sanctions. It is Zimbabweans in their generality who are saying these sanctions are hurting us, please lift them as quickly as possible. But beyond that, the fact that the region has joined in, has added its weight, has stood in solidarity with Zimbabwe, declaring this anti-sanctions day across the SADC region, and the growing number of voices across the African region, I think will also give Zimbabwe's government a moral victory to say, look, it is not just Zimbabwe, but it is the entire or a large number of African states that are behind us, that are amplifying their voices, that are adding to our voices for the unconditional and immediate removal of these sanctions. So there may not be immediate action or immediate response, but I think what Zimbabwe is aiming for here is that moral victory to show that indeed it is not just us, the government, it is all Zimbabweans from all walks of life, it is Africans across the African continent who are saying let's remove these sanctions, and that is what's about. That is the message that the government will hope will be sent to those people that have imposed the sanctions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That was CGTN's Farai Wakatuya in Harare for us, and of course earlier we spoke to Angelo Coppola in Johannesburg on Zimbabwe's new public holiday in protest at the sanctions in Zimbabwe. Moving on to other news now. In Rwanda, the United Nations Emergency Transit Center in Gashora has become home to 189 migrants. They had fled their homes in Africa, hoping for a better life in Europe by trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea. Authorities are now trying to close this route to Europe. In September, the UNHCR signed a deal with Rwanda to resettle them, while the agency determines their status and where they will be resettled. CG10's Brian Toussaint with more.
These men, women, and children all took a dangerous journey across the Mediterranean Sea trying to get to Europe. Many of them say they endured suffering in the hands of smugglers and traffickers. Those that ended up in Libyan detention centers complain of inhumane conditions in the centers. But despite going through all of this, some of them still want to pursue their European dream.
All of us, we are looking for another step, because we are already worried about thinking about the day that we will go out from the African continent.
That's your dream?
Yeah, this is our dream for everyone here, especially for us all. We need to go out.
Rwanda has agreed to host these asylum seekers after signing an agreement with UNHCR in September.
We have a room there where they can watch TV, check the news, and very soon we would like to have access to computer so that they can have access to, talk to their family using internet, access to connectivity, open so much opportunities in terms of communication with family, learning, and also know what's happening out there in the world, because they have been outside of social network for a long time.
The UNHCR says around 3,000 migrants are still thought to be in detention in Libya. Another 120 migrants are expected to arrive in the country next month. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Mr. Bassem Ali, editor at Ahram Online and expert on North African affairs based in Cairo, joins us now to discuss the migrant issue. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Ali. Why are migrants searching for a better life away from Africa?
We always tend to think about migration as an attempt for survival, or considering a second chance for life away from a number of social, economic, and political and security threats that might be facing them. But in fact, migration is also an attempt, or actually that's a key part of it, and that involves comparing options. For a migrant who is coming from Africa, he has one or two options, I mean practically, that he has to move within their borders. One of them is moving to another African country, and the second is moving to Europe. When you compare the social conditions, the economic conditions, the working opportunities, everything, migrants end up thinking that it's better to take the risk and go to Europe, regardless of the cost that they might pay. So at the end of the day, they simply are checking their options. They find that one option is better than another. Yes, there is a cost, which is getting lost or losing their lives in the sea throughout the journey. But at the end, they know that there is a reward that they might get if they went there. And that's how they think. This is the perspective of a migrant. And on that basis, we try to understand their problems and consider the alternatives or the possible solutions that we can think of or adopt in order to solve their problems.
And Rwanda is hosting migrants from Libya who don't want to stay in Africa. Does this pose a security threat?
It depends. It depends on how the government of Rwanda is willing to deal with them. Usually, in terms of migrants, you have two strategies that you can follow. One is a short-term one, and the other is a long-term strategy. For the short term, you start dealing with your territory as a transit destination in which migrants would be then transferred to another place. And in that case, I think what they have to provide for the migrants is simply food, medication, and protection. But if they are planning for a long-term stay for those migrants in Rwanda, then we will have a totally different kind of discussion. And that will lead us to a number of questions, including, for example, are they willing, Rwanda's government, is it willing to integrate those migrants in the economy? Are they willing to offer them chances for education, for training? Are they willing to give, are they willing to teach them the language and the culture of the country? So at the end of the day, it all depends on the strategy. And on that basis, the discussion with the migrants will take place. They will tell them whether they will be there in Rwanda for a short period of time or for many years coming ahead. As much frank as they will be in dealing with the situation, security threats will be understood in better terms. So if the migrants know that they will leave after a short period of time, I don't think they will have a high level of expectations, and accordingly they will not cause any kind of tensions or trouble. But if it's about a long-term thing, then it's better to discuss all aspects of the situation just to make sure that all parties to this matter are satisfied and that they receive the rights and conduct the duties in the best possible manner.
Okay, Bassem Ali, thank you very much for your analysis. Moving on to other news now, the Chinese embassy in London says police have not yet confirmed if the bodies of 39 people found in a truck are Chinese. Police say the truck found in the southeastern county of Essex entered the country from Belgium, where the investigation is continuing. CGTN's Nicole Johnson reports.
The bodies were found at an industrial park, 1 hour's drive east of London in Essex, on Wednesday morning. The case has shocked the UK and beyond. Chinese government officials have given this statement.
we read with a heavy heart the reports about the death of 39 people in Essex, England. We were in close contact with the British police to seek clarification and confirmation of the relevant reports.
Police say the trailer came from Zeebrugge in Belgium. It entered the UK at Purfleet on the River Thames. A truck and driver from Northern Ireland then picked up the trailer, driving it to a nearby industrial estate. The 25-year-old driver has been arrested on suspicion of murder. This is one of the biggest murder investigations undertaken in the UK, and it's international, with inquiries from Belgium to Bulgaria. And while we don't know the full background of the victims or why they were in the truck, this case has focused attention on the problem of human trafficking. This driver from Lithuania says containers and refrigerated trailers are sealed when drivers pick them up, and drivers don't check the cargo inside. He says this means drivers can become unwittingly caught up in human trafficking.
Until arrival to my destination, I shouldn't open the container. That's the thing. So we as the drivers, we never know basically what's in the container. Sometimes in the delivery note it says some kind of description, but sometimes it even doesn't say any word. So until we arrive to destination, we cut the seals. That at that moment we only know what's in the container.
On Wednesday night, police moved the truck and container from the industrial estate to Tilbury Docks to continue identifying bodies. Authorities said this was to preserve the victim's dignity, but there is no dignity in a death like this. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, South East England.
Meanwhile, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has commented on the situation in South East England. It said it was waiting for authorities in the UK to make a formal statement on the identity of the victims and asked that the perpetrators see justice.
British police are still trying to identify the 39 victims and cannot yet confirm if they were Chinese nationals. The Chinese government attaches great importance to this incident, and relevant departments are working on it. We hope the UK government can confirm and verify the identity of the victims as soon as possible. We hope it can find the truth and severely punish the criminals involved according to the law.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including wild poliovirus type 3 has been eradicated worldwide. And UN reopens office in Abuja 8 years after a bomb attack.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Wild poliovirus type 3 has been eradicated worldwide. This was announced by an independent commission of experts who have been working to wipe out the virus's 3 strains. The declaration coincided with World Polio Day, marked on October the 24th. Only one type of polio now remains in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Here's CGTN's Brian Toussaint with this report.
The last case of wild poliovirus type 3 was detected in northern Nigeria in 2012. Certification of the eradication of type 2 of the virus took place in 2015, while the last incident of type 1 was reported in 2016 still in Nigeria.
We cannot relax our vigilance for program performance, that's vaccination that protects children, our surveillance to find polioviruses, our preparedness to deal with any poliovirus should it occur, and our ability to contain polioviruses forever. We've eradicated 2 of the 3 polioviruses. We have just 1 strain of poliovirus left in 2 countries. We just have to finish this job.
All 3 strains of the virus are identical in that they cause irreversible paralysis or even death. However, some genetic and virological differences mean that they must be dealt with separately.
This is only a milestone. We have not reached our destination. The last mile, as we know, is the hardest mile, and we must continue even greater, with greater commitment and determination until polio is eradicated.
Investments in skilled workers, innovative tools, and a global network of laboratories have helped determine that no wild poliovirus type 3 exists anywhere in the world.
The infrastructure we have built must not die with polio. The investment in polio are vital investments in stronger health system and universal health coverage. The same health workers who deliver polio vaccines have helped fight Ebola, cholera, and other disease outbreaks, address malnutrition, provide measles vaccinations, deworming tablets, and malaria bed nets. It's a great example of how a disease-specific program can contribute to health system strengthening and our goal of universal health coverage.
According to the Global Polio Eradication Initiative report, efforts to wipe out the virus have saved countries about $27 billion in health costs since 1988. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
In Nigeria, the United Nations has reopened its building in the capital Abuja 8 years after a bomb attack. The August 2011 bombing left 23 people dead and several others wounded. The UN was forced to continue its operations from donated buildings to allow renovation work. Looking to the future, the 75th UN Assembly is set to redouble its efforts and commitment to multilateralism. CGTN's Kelechi Emeklem has more.
A ribbon-cutting ceremony to mark the official reopening of the United Nations building in Abuja, one of the most secure public buildings in the state. The downpour was no hindrance to the huge turnout at the event, which also commemorates the 74th UN Day celebration. This year's theme, The Future We Want, the United Nations We Need, focuses on UN's commitment to multilateralism as the only way to tackle malnutrition, terrorism, climate change, migration, and other global issues.
The United Nations remains, above all, a promise to the 202 million people in Nigeria and 7.7 billion people around the world of a more prosperous, a more sustainable, and a more peaceful future. A future of tolerance and coexistence, whatever our differences of religion, race, or tribe.
The UN has been instrumental to supporting millions in the Northeast affected by the 10-year-long insurgency, and it pledges to double its efforts towards helping Nigeria attain its goals.
Many have asked and are still asking the question whether Nigeria can meet the Sustainable Development Goals. I want to assure today that the potential exists, and the country needs to mobilize all actors in a business-unusual approach. Nigeria has the human and material resources available to drive this movement towards building a better country if we all work together.
The climax of the event was the laying of wreath in memory of all victims of the 2011 attack. Nigeria has been an active and key supporter of the United Nations since the country's independence in 1960. As an active player, The country has contributed to UN peacekeeping missions. Now, this now opens a new chapter of cooperation for both parties. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
We are going to a short break. We've got all the business news coming up for you, including the city of Johannesburg under cyber attack.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The city of Johannesburg has fallen victim to a cyber attack hours after receiving a Bitcoin ransom demand. A group calling itself the Shadow Kill Hackers is demanding 4 Bitcoins before 5 p.m. on the 28th of October. A Bitcoin is currently valued at $7,000. Should the hackers not receive payment, they are threatening to upload sensitive data they claim to have onto the internet. City of Johannesburg has confirmed the breach via Twitter, saying it has detected a network breach and is taking appropriate action to mitigate any potential effects. Several South African banks have also reported internet issues, possibly related to the hack. However, this is yet to be confirmed. As a result, online e-services and call center logging have been suspended. Meanwhile, South African government officials are set to receive free cyber security training in a bid to reduce exposure to the growing threat of cybercrime. The move comes after ABSA Bank partnered up with new tech startup GovChat to begin providing the training to government departments at a new cyber security facility to be established in Cape Town. CGTN's Travis Andrews has this report.
Cybercrimes have become a global issue that is predicted will cost the world roughly $6 trillion by 2021. Closer to home, both the presidency and national treasury have already become high-profile victims. The departments were hacked almost a year ago, and now the government wants to make sure that's not repeated, and have turned to ABSA Bank and GovChat to prepare them for any threat.
I think that bringing this partnership together, we can share our cybersecurity expertise with government. It's around the roundtables that will be run here at the GovChat head office, where ministers can walk in, have a chat with our cybersecurity consultants, and just to better educate themselves and improve their cybersecurity knowledge.
Security consultants will be pivotal in assisting the government to have better defense mechanisms to combat the crimes, which is tracking along with the digital revolution. The threats posed can be endless and expose various departments to issues such as fraud through hacking, siphoning money away that is especially needed for service delivery.
I think that there will be a huge focus on local government. So municipalities, it's the face of service delivery, and I think that systems at a municipal and at a local government level needs those expertise and advice. And so that will be a focus, but I do think that national government departments like government comms, if you look at state security, if you look at agriculture.
Security experts have predicted there will be more than 3.5 million cybersecurity vacancies by 2021. Now, in there lies the potential for the government to address serious job creation issues, especially to combat what could be one of the most important cybersecurity threats facing the public.
Look at ID numbers, which is a contract between citizens and government, not between banks or the private sector. It's an agreement between citizens and government. I think the protection of that data is an important one.
In many ways, the government has turned to the private sector because they have the expertise necessary to deal with cybercrime that is not only damaging in its current form, but is expected to evolve over time. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
40 of the 46 South African planes grounded earlier this week as a precautionary measure have returned to service. The groundings followed a notice from South Africa's Civil Aviation Authority relating to what it described as irregular findings. Picked up at the maintenance unit of state-owned South African Airways. With the details, here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola.
The three affected South African airlines essentially voluntarily grounded themselves when concerns were raised around SAA technical operations and documentation procedures.
Everybody took this very seriously. There was the airlines accepted and understood what the concern of the Civil Aviation Authority was. There was incredible cooperation between them and the SA Authority to get corrective action plans submitted, for them to be reviewed, and the CAA also then reacted quite quickly in terms of closing certain findings, and then also dealing with other findings and requesting additional information.
The South African Civil Aviation Authority, who is responsible for the safety and security of aircraft and personnel in the country, confirmed that they were about to undertake some form of sanction following the incident.
Of course, we take enforcement action. As I'm speaking with you now, the enforcement action is going on. So it's just that it's not public.
There's now a question of trust that's been raised between SAA Technical and two of the three airlines, namely Comair and Kalula. For some time now, Comair has been working to extricate itself from the maintenance deal with SAA Technical.
I wouldn't say the trust is broken down, but I think there's obviously some areas that needs some attention to ensure that that trust is probably built up further to be able to carry on with a normal operation.
The Transport Ministry, under which the Civil Aviation Authority rests, has been keeping a close watch on the situation. A report has been submitted and acted on.
But it is upon us as practitioners, may it be the regulator and the operators, to explain to the passengers and the public so that there is no panic and frenzy out of control where people don't understand exactly what is happening. So everything is under control. We're acting in the best interest of our people, and all the other issues that have been identified technically in terms of the findings are being attended to.
All but two of the aircraft are safely back in the air again.
From our perspective, it's important that the passengers maintain a confidence in the aviation industry in South Africa, that they know they're safe and reliable, and they get on that aircraft, it's safe to fly.
While the authorities and the government are quick to tell everybody that it's safe to travel in South African skies and to land at South African airports, there's still some lingering concerns. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Sudan and Ethiopia have agreed to construct a joint cross-border oil pipeline that will serve the two countries. The agreement was reached earlier this month during a bilateral meeting between the two economies. However, as CGTN's Coletta Wanjoy now reports, the deal will need the cooperation of South Sudan to happen.
Sudan has two main oil export pipelines that travel north across the country to its port. The crude oil originates in neighboring South Sudan, which pumps it into Sudan. Now, Ethiopia and Sudan have agreed to build a joint pipeline, but they will need the cooperation of South Sudan to make this happen. And stability in Juba will be key in making this initiative a success, as political analyst Sunday Okello explains.
Sudan, Ethiopia, and bringing in South Sudan, and the area, the geography where this pipeline is actually passing through, these are areas which are very contentious, very is having a lot of conflicts. People are fighting in those areas, and basically also very much underdeveloped in South Sudan especially. So we are seeing a situation where we should not just address the deal of the pipeline, but we should also look at how does it bring stability, how do you put in security issues, which is very contentious in South Sudan today.
But an older deal between Ethiopia and South Sudan is yet to materialize. In 2017, the two agreed to build a road linking the countries together, enabling South Sudan to export its oil to landlocked Ethiopia. Juba says it hasn't yet been invited by Ethiopia and Sudan for talks about the new agreement, but offers that it is open to new ideas.
We are looking for corridors of how this oil can be going out to the international markets. South Sudan is blessed. We have a lot of oil that is mainly going towards the borders of Sudan. That one will continue going if we are also going to be able to find some corridors which will bring the oil through Ethiopia to Djibouti. That will be fine. We still have our way to go through Lamu, also in Kenya. These are also the corridors that South Sudan need to, find out and work out.
Morgan adds that for now, the priority of South Sudan is to return peace to the country, which has been struggling with internal conflict since 2013. A transitional government is set to form in South Sudan on 12th November, but it is already facing a major challenge. All parties are set to agree on a start date, but opposition leader Riek Machar says he wants more time. He says the security is not enough for him and his people to feel safe to go back home. The government says a delay in elections is a delay in development.
Now again, Riek is asking for another 3 to 4 months, and I think that is not going to fly. People are tired. As a government, we are responsible for every citizen of South Sudan. We will not allow any citizen again to continue suffering. We are ready to form the government.
South Sudan's Petroleum Ministry says the country is currently producing close to 180,000 barrels of oil and has plans of increasing production by 15,000 more barrels soon. But it could be some time before Ethiopia is able to receive this oil from the newly agreed pipeline. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
We've got all the sports news coming up for you after the break, including football broadcasting rights take centre stage at football lawyers' gathering in Cairo.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
This week, the International Association for Football Lawyers is holding its first meeting in Africa, in the Egyptian capital, Cairo. It's discussing football broadcasting rights both in the region and globally. Football lawyers from across the world are also reviewing FIFA's new regulations on transfers and agents. In recent years, countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia have been trying to stand against a football broadcast monopoly. Qatari network beIN Sport has for years been the exclusive broadcaster for the Africa Cup of Nations, the FIFA World Cup and other competitions. With more, here's Adel El Mahrouhi about the fight for football broadcast monopoly.
Experts of football law are here in Cairo for the first AIAF meeting held in Africa. Football broadcast rights is one of its main topics, and an issue the Arab world has been suffering from for years.
Citizens have the right to watch their national teams. In Egypt, we must move to file cases and amend continental regulations that can protect the Egyptian citizens' rights to watch their team. In the 2018 World Cup, 4 Arab nations were in the competition, and people were challenged to watch the games. Of course, piracy is not accepted. It's why we need to move now.
Premier League has never sold all rights to a single purchaser, to a single media company, but has always created packages sold to individual buyers. And this, of course, has granted from the one hand, competition in the market. So during tender processes, when they had several competitors they had the possibility to earn big revenues. And of course, also the platforms that are authorized for the exploitation of the rights have been segmented in a way to avoid that a single operator can exploit the whole package of rights.
Yet since 2010, one company has been monopolizing almost all prime international competitions, beIN Sports. Some believe the networks enriched the sports media industry.
beIN Sports experience very positive because it's really a big broadcaster for Middle East, and it